Hey folks, how's it going? Coach Danny here from the Basketball Coaches Academy, and today we are going to chat a little bit about dealing with attitude as a youth basketball coach, and really this can be applied across the board. When you're dealing with coaching basketball, but really right now we're talking about dealing with youth basketball teams because that's really when you get a lot of this attitude and weird behavioral problems and honestly, this comes up a lot, for the members of our email list, our Basketball Coaches Academy email list, which I highly recommend everybody join. You can, download your free resources in the comment section and join our email list. But, some of the requests that I get the most here is, Coach Danny, how do we deal with attitudes in practice? How do we deal with bad behavior? And, this is a topic that honestly, it took me a little bit of a long time as a coach to figure this out and to really understand, what to do here. And it is a tough thing. It is a tough situation. So today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how we deal with it, how to control what we can control, as youth basketball coaches, right? And it's funny because as youth basketball coaches, we are in a bit of a unique situation because, we're dealing with youth players, right? So we're not dealing with, professional players where we can go make cuts or, pick, free agents or draft people that maybe fit our culture. So what we need to do as youth basketball coaches is really work on creating that culture, right? And that is the culture of the behavior that we want, because realistically, we are showing as coaches, youth players, how to be in a competitive environment. So we really do control what is accepted and what is not. Again, we're not able to go make cuts. We're not able to go we can make cuts when we make tryouts. But once a team is picked, if you have a bad seed, chances are you're not going to be able to go trade that player for another player with a better attitude. You're not able to go, leave that player behind and go sign a new player in free agency. That's not how it works in youth basketball. So, how do we deal with it? How do we deal with a bad seed that maybe we didn't notice in tryouts or maybe we were forced to accept on our team? Well, again, that comes back to creating that culture, right, as a youth basketball coach, because you have to think of it, right? Again, we are teaching players what is acceptable and what is not. So it starts with us, right? So how do we set that tone, right? As coaches, we need to show the type of culture that we want the players to follow, right? So if we come in the gym and, maybe it's a great player on our team and they're a little bit cocky, they have an attitude toward the coach, they have an attitude toward the rest of the team. If we continue to let that player play high minutes in games, have, free reign to do whatever they want, they're not going to improve their culture. They're not going to improve their behavior at all, right? We're just basically catering our team to them. And that is a huge no-no. That is something you cannot do, right? So you need to make your boundaries clear. You need to make your culture clear to your players. And if you haven't done that yet in those behavioral expectations, you have to do that immediately. Next practice, implement this right away. What is a part of your culture that you want to continue to implement? What is a part of your culture that you want all players to follow? And, maybe that's coming in and talking to your team about, okay, we are no longer going to tolerate this. Going forward, we want everybody to have positive attitudes in practice. You're going to clap every time we come in the middle for a huddle. You're going to high five a teammate, before you go get a water break. We're going to call each other out and say something good that one of our teammates, maybe did over the last, 10 to 20 minutes. All of these different things, you can talk to your team about, this is what we expect. And if you have a player who is not pulling their weight there and is not following that positive attitude culture, don't play them. And let that be known to your teams. If you're not going to follow our culture, you're not going to play, right? And then the expectation is there. Right? The expectation is there for all players across the board, right? I remember we laid out our ground rules of 1 year of respect, for our players, respect for our coaches, respect for our facility. We expect this. We expect that respect across the board. We're respecting you as a youth player. You owe us that respect. You owe our facility that respect. You owe your teammates that respect. And that was our, motto going into the season. And I remember, a stronger player on one of my teams, after a game that we lost, took off his jersey and slammed it on the ground. And, there is a way to handle that. You don't want to call that player out in front of all of their teammates, but, we definitely had a conversation with that player and let them know, hey, we told you an expectation of ours is that we're going to have a positive culture. We're going to have a respectful culture where you respect your facility, you respect your teammates, you respect your team, you respect your coaches. And when you rip off your jersey in the middle of a game or at the end of the game because things didn't go your way, that's not respecting the facility. That's not respecting your team. So you're going to have a minutes restriction in the next game. Keeping it simple as that. You're going to respect the player by having that normal conversation with them, right? You're not screaming at them, yelling at them, turning them against you. You're teaching them what is acceptable to be on a team, like what is acceptable as a teammate. You're teaching them what is acceptable in your culture. And if we're going to have a culture of respect, that's not acceptable. So it's just having those conversations, right? You have to understand that, a part of you might want to be like, to the kid or to the youth player, what are you doing? And get upset and get mad because maybe they aren't respecting the culture. But you have to understand that as a youth coach, you're also a teacher, right? I said in the beginning of the episode here is that, we are teaching these players what is an acceptable culture and what is not, right? So you need to have those conversations with the player and explain, look, this was not a part of our culture. What you did right here, again, tying back to the example of ripping off the jersey, what you did is not a part of our culture. That doesn't sit well with us, right? That's not respecting our facility. That's not respecting your teammates, right? So you're going to have a minutes restriction, okay? Understand that next game, shake it off, come back to the next one with respect, right? So you're just laying those ground rules out. You're giving them teaching moments, right? And you're not getting mad at the players either because you have to understand these are kids. They are learning, right? They are learning what is appropriate and what is not, and you have to teach them, right? Teaching them isn't necessarily always getting mad at them. Teaching them isn't necessarily letting things slide, but teaching is talking to them, right? Setting those ground rules as the coach, right? And explaining, hey, what you did right now or what you're doing doesn't fall in line with our culture. So you have to fix that. And I think those are appropriate ways to handle it. Lay out your expectations and follow them. Hold yourself accountable. And it's not always easy to do that with, maybe your best player on the team who's giving you 20 or 30 every game. You're going to have to put them on a minutes restriction, but in the long run, it benefits your team, it benefits your program because everybody else then is going to follow, right? They understand that, hey, maybe this kid didn't, demonstrate positive culture, didn't demonstrate positive behavior. They're on a minutes restriction. I can't do that, or I'm going to be on a minutes restriction, right? But if they see, a couple players with bad attitude, do something and you let it slide, well, they know that they can come in with a bad attitude and you'll let it slide as well. So hold yourself accountable as a coach. That's what I always say. But, even if we have to get a little bit uncomfortable and, put players on minutes restrictions that aren't necessarily, the ideal candidate to be on a minutes restriction, but, you have to do it, right? You have to demonstrate that culture. So again, talk to your team, talk about the expectations that you have, lay it out in a mature, normal manner, but hold your players accountable when they don't follow them. And again, that doesn't mean to scream and yell and get mad, but be a teacher, teach them. And if they're, sometimes just it happening once might not be enough. It might have to happen 5 or 6 times until it really clicks to them. Hey, I want to play, I have to stop this with my negative behavior. So that would be my advice there. And another thing that I would add on to all of that is, parent involvement is key. Getting buy-in from the parents of a youth basketball team here is also very important, right? You want that. So it's very important that you explain to the parents as well as explaining to the athletes what your expectations are, right? Hey, parents, listen, we're going to really focus on our behavior and our respect and our culture as a team. So going forward, we're going to implement these rules. We want all players to respect the facility, all players to respect their environment, all players to respect their coaches, all players to respect their teammates. If anything happens that any of our coaches believe is not respecting any of these things, they're going to get put on a minutes restriction next game. I'm just letting you know in advance so you can have this conversation with your athletes, right? Having them involved, having that parent buy-in is super important. And even just letting them know about it, right? If you let those parents know about it beforehand, okay, they understand now. So if that happens to their athlete gets put on a minutes restriction, they're aware. If they ask you, you can explain, well, this athlete didn't demonstrate these things that we talked about. They didn't demonstrate respect in this area. So they're on a minutes restriction. So just having that involvement there from the parents is important. And, even just having them aware of what is going on, right? You don't want to just say this to the players, have an athlete sit for the next game or be on a minute's restriction, and then the parent is super confused as to why that was, right? You want the involvement on both ends. So again, this, I hope this makes a lot of sense here. It's a lot, obviously, but the real thing to remember is, like, you are a teacher as a coach, right? So you have to be the one to lay down these ground rules and hold your team accountable and teach them what is right and what is wrong. These aren't NBA players, these aren't college players. We're dealing with youth players. Even at the high school ages, they're still learning what is appropriate and what's not. So as youth basketball coaches, you need to teach, you need to show them, you need to lay down those expectations. And if you really hold yourself accountable to holding your team accountable, I personally think, and from my experience, that the attitude and the behavior does start to improve over time, and you might not have those issues anymore. It obviously is unfortunate when you do have a bad seed on your team, but again, just remember, these are youth players. They're still learning. They're still growing. So take it on yourself to really set that tone. And I think having those conversations with the players, holding them accountable without making an enemy of them, is a really important step in terms of setting that culture. But let me know what you guys think. If anybody's watching this, again, this video came from an idea that was talked about in our email list. So if anybody is interested in joining our email list, receiving lots of coaches content, plays, drills, conversations, etc., feel free to join our email list. All you need to do is download your free resources, which are in the comments, which are your free guide to the motion offense, free baseline out of bounds and sideline out of bounds plays, and our practice planning template. When you download those three things, you'll also subscribe to our email list. So highly recommend that. And then you can get involved in some of these conversations as well, and suggest some things to talk about. Until next time, see ya.